Welcome, everyone. I'm Joe Tarnowski with ECRM, and I want to thank you all for joining us. Today's fireside chat is about a topic that is near and dear to my heart: storytelling. So, my guest, Lyn Graft, is the founder of Storytelling for Entrepreneurs and the author of Start with Story, which I got this book a little while ago. It's an amazing book, had some great insights for brand owners and entrepreneurs. And we're going to talk about some of the topics that it covers during our conversation. So, a little background on Lyn. He's filmed over 1,000 entrepreneurs, including the founders of Starbucks, Whole Foods, and LinkedIn. He co-created and produced CNBC's TV series American Made, and has produced over 1,000 videos for entities such as Entrepreneur Magazine, Microsoft, Dell, and Nestle. He's founded 8 companies, raised over 10 million in venture funding, and is currently a partner at Shar Snacks. He also serves or has served on the advisory boards for South by Southwest, Dell, and Empowering a Billion Women. So, Lyn, thank you so much for joining us. And to start off, I'd like you to do some storytelling and give us a little background on the work you've done with entrepreneurs and how that all resulted in your company and your book.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Joe. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that I'm kind of a chronicler. And it kind of started, I'd say, when I was in college and I was in a fraternity, and I was the person who bought the most photos out of everybody for every event that we had. Literally, I go through the thing and I just buy. And that kind of started me down that journey. But out of undergrad, I became an engineer. Discovered very quickly that I didn't like being in a cubicle all day. I was more of an extrovert, wanted to get out there. So I did the next best thing. I quit my job and became a ski instructor. Now, this is really important because I spent a couple of years as an engineer in Phoenix, and then I moved to the mountains of Colorado. And when you're a ski instructor, you have an opportunity to spend time on the lifts, usually 15 to 20 minutes in between lessons or while you're giving instruction. Mm-hmm. And the people that had the most passion, that twinkle in their eye, that were there for the day or for the weekend, and they were excited to go back to work, it was entrepreneurs, business owners, even really before I even knew what the term entrepreneur even meant. And I think that's when the seed was planted in me. So when I was teaching skiing, I was living in my car. I did that for a couple of years and lived in Tahoe in Colorado. I was researching grad schools, decided that Austin, Texas, University of Texas, Hook 'em Horns, was a great entrepreneurial program because it had access to a lot of startups in the Austin community. So when I got my MBA there, I worked for a startup out of school. And it was the first time in my life I ever had a key to the front door. I was employee number 7, and I found it really cool. I was definitely like the Philo, first in, last out, because I treated it like my company. And soon thereafter, we went from $100,000 to $1 million, and I was in charge of sales and marketing. I did my own startup, and that became part of a 6 or 7 year journey for my first real startup, where I learned all the hard challenges and faced. And then over that time, that was what I consider a failure. That company didn't make it. We raised $7 million for that one, but unfortunately, we just weren't wrong timing for what we had, and we weren't able to make the right decisions. But what it did give me is a lot of exposure to other founders, successful entrepreneurs, venture capital community, the ecosystem that supports startups in general. And I did a couple more startups, had a win, and then another couple losses, and another big win. And while I was in between my next startup, I just sold one, and my best friend says, "Hey, will you help me with this video project? I want to create a television show featuring entrepreneurs I want to pitch to the networks." And I'm like, "Sure." I didn't know anything about television or media, but I grabbed the camera and I started following her around. And the first paid project I ever did as an entrepreneur was filming Michael Dell. Michael Dell's my best friend, her name is Ingrid Vanderbilt, and her mentor was Dr. George Kosmetzky. He was also a mentor to Michael Dell. So this piece was to feature the mentor or the mentees of Dr. George Kosmetzky, Ingrid being one of them, and Michael Dell being another one. So we went up to his office, and while we're filming him and Dr. Kosmetzky, it was a great opportunity. And Dr. George Kosmetzky says, "Why don't you film a couple of my other mentees?" So in my first project, I filmed Michael Dell, a billionaire, Dr. George Kosmetzky, a billionaire, and the third one was Red McCombs, the founder of Clear Channel, and also owner of the Spurs at that time down in San Antonio. So 3 billionaire entrepreneurs in my first paid gig ever as an entrepreneur. And that's what put me on that journey to kind of just getting exposed to a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think I got a slide that you were going to share, Joe, that kind of gives
Sure.
people that kind of that rich perspective, where I would say just the multitude of the different people I've had the unique opportunity to experience. As Joe had mentioned, it's been 1,000 entrepreneurs. And because the nature of what I was doing, I was filming for television, for conferences, for trade shows, or for corporations in general. So they gave me access to their customers, their partners, people within their ecosystem. So I really got this unique opportunity to film a broad spectrum of very successful founders over that time.
You know, it's funny. It's interesting you mentioned that because the way I kind of got into what I'm doing is very similar. I got my first article published. It was actually an assignment at college for a news writing class. Never even thought of content or back then journalism as a career. But for some reason, I had to cover a local event in the Upper East Side because that's where my college was. And I wrote up the news story about it. It was a business seminar that was given in the basement of a church every Tuesday night. And I was like, for some reason, I was like, let me just put it on the desk of the editor-in-chief of, at the time, it was called the Upper East Side Resident, local newspaper, 60,000 circ. And then he called me back. He's like, hey, we loved it. We want to publish it. Would you write some more? It wasn't a paid one like your first ones, but it got me my first 5 bylines. That got me my first job in trade journalism. And that kind of got me every other job I had in my career. So very, very similar story to that.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I would love for you to share. You can pull up that video that we have of one of the individuals that I featured. His name is Howard Schultz. He's the founder of Starbucks that you referenced earlier, and he is one of the most favored entrepreneurs that I've ever filmed in my 18-year career of capturing these stories, because he has this unique ability to articulate a vision, what's interesting to him, what's important to audiences, whether they're consumers or also as it pertains to raising capital, the press, media. He's just an amazing storyteller. I don't know if you're able to pull that up yet.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up. I just was waiting for you to finish because we won't be able to hear you talk until the video's done. So
Okay,
I'm going to pull it up right now, and then I'll catch you on the other end of it. Okay.
Okay.
There were weeks and months where not only could we not pay certain vendors, but we had a great difficulty making payroll. And I went almost a year without a salary. My wife Sherry was pregnant with our first child, and she was the breadwinner in the family. And while her parents were here from Ohio, her father asked if we can take a walk. And while on that walk, I guess you would say maybe had a come to Jesus meeting with me and asked me when I was going to get a job and give up this hobby. That was a difficult walk. We stayed the course, we raised the money, and the rest is history. I left out of that meeting when I told that story, I just started to cry because I was so embarrassed. And I think back on that, and I know where he was coming from, but sometimes the difference between winning and losing, or success and failure, is that gray area of perseverance and just will. And I think I look back in the last 20 years, and there were moments where I just feel like we willed it. We did. We willed it.
Yeah,
Very cool.
Thanks for playing that, Joe. And that moment, so those were actually 2 different shots, one from the shareholders meeting that we filmed him, and another that we were filming in a coffee shop in an urban area of Seattle. And it was that moment where we're in the urban coffee shop, and he referenced being in front of all the thousands of shareholders. I think there was 10,000 total that were either there or watching. And he talks about how he cried off stage. And we got a CEO of a Fortune 50 company at the time saying that he cried, and that sharing that story. And it was one of those moments, Joe, where I knew I was going to be a great producer. And it wasn't anything magical per se that I did. It was just that we captured a moment that was emotional. I wanted to share what I just experienced with every entrepreneur that I knew. I was like, oh my God, you got to watch this interview with Howard Schultz. He talks about sometimes you just got to keep going through that great area of perseverance. And that's going to be the difference between winning and losing. And to me, A lot of times what you're trying to do as a founder is share those emotional moments that connect with audience that are so powerful that you reach them on that emotional level, and they want to tell someone about it. They want to tell their best friend, their wife, their husband, their anybody that they're doing stuff with. And that's one of the real secrets of storytelling, is finding those golden nuggets to share.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And during my career, I've done a lot of interviews, and sometimes it it's not always obvious. It'll come, like, I would let the interviewees wander a little bit, because sometimes when they go off on a tangent, that's where you get that little gold nugget, like that little segment where he talks about he cried afterwards. You just keep listening and listening, and you never know where that's going to come from.
Absolutely. It's kind of like you're peeling that onion until you finally get to that really tasty part of the onion.
Definitely. So why does storytelling matter? We had Wendy Saltzman on Monday. She presented, and she was talking about on camera etiquette, and that was one of her points. She just addressed it briefly because her main thing was about how to interact on screen. But she talked about the importance of storytelling, and that whole emotional, getting to those emotions.
Yeah, if you can pull up slide number 2 with the 3 reasons slide, and this is really what it comes down to. And I want the audience to understand here is that when I was a producer and I was capturing these stories, I really didn't know anything technically or academically or historically about storytelling. I was in front of these entrepreneurs and I'm filming them, and I'll just capture it as we go. And over time I got better and better, and I surrounded myself with writers and editors and people that, from a video standpoint, I became really good at it. But then I started teaching it, and I started writing a book about it. So if you ever want to learn something, teach it, because it forces you to learn it very quickly. And
Definitely.
so I had an opportunity over the last decade, really. I spent 6 years every single day, first hour of that day, writing my book. And then I would make phone calls and schedule meetings with researchers, neuroscientists, psychologists, anthropologists, archaeologists, understanding the art and science of storytelling. And it boils down to kind of 3 things that I really talk to people about. One, ever since the dawn of time, we have been surrounded by stories. We grew up with them since we were walking the earth. From the time you're born as a child, you're read stories, education, all the way up from preschool to kindergarten, and from grade school to grad school. There are stories all around us. So our minds are really meant to understand and interpret the world through stories. Really, over the last 10, we have technologies now that we can look at the brain and what's happening when you're receiving information. And it's really fascinating that we now know that if I share a fact or piece of information with you, it's going to activate 2 parts of the brain. But if I share a compelling story with you, 6 to 7 parts of the brain are going to be activated. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But just remember that when you share a story, more parts of the brain are going to be triggered. So hence you have a higher probability of being remembered. 6 times more memorable if I share a story with you versus just that fact alone. So that's one of the key reasons that you want to do this, is you really want to know that you're triggering the brain. Ultimately, what happens is when the brain starts receiving this information, you're triggering emotions. And at the end of the day, Joe, the reason we tell stories is to reach people on an emotional level. Chemicals such as cortisol, which gets your attention, the love chemical, which makes you want to hug and be around people. There's all these different chemicals, just starts flying off the head. And this is why you can feel, it's called the mirror effect. If you've ever been in a movie and it's an action movie, and all of a sudden there's a part where there's a lot of things going on and you feel your adrenaline, your heartbeat story going up. Or you're at home and you're watching a sad TV show and you start crying, even though it's fictional, you might have seen it before, a movie before. And what's happening is your brain is mimicking what's happening in the storyteller's perspective, whether it's a book, a movie, or even a person telling you on stage. Our brains start going in sync, and we start feeling what the storyteller is. And what you're trying to do as an entrepreneur is, I want you, Joe, to feel as passionate about storytelling as I do. So I want to share an emotional story with you that are going to get those chemicals flying in yourself.
And I think that's a really important point because, in these buyer meetings, right, you have the supply, our brands, they're a lot of times they need to use data too. And data is important, but data in itself is, like you mentioned, it's not going to light up all those areas of the brain. But if you put it in the right context of a story that really focuses on what's the value to the buyer, and maybe wrap it in something that will drive those emotions, they'll be more likely to remember it, especially if they're meeting with so many other people on the same day.
Yeah, data is such an important, Joe. I'm really glad you brought that point up. If you'll bring up the next slide, I'm a mentor to the SKU Accelerator, which is the Consumer Packaged Goods Accelerator here in Austin, Texas. This is my 6th year of being a mentor. And one of the teams in there last year was called Ladybird Provisions. And Ladybird makes these coffee bombs. Essentially, these are collagen and different supplements that are in a dry packet, and you drop them in your coffee bomb so that gives them flavor and nutrients, and even coconut cream and different things like that. So it sweetens it or gives it nutrients or whatever you want. You can pick and choose. So we're talking with them, and they've been in business, for a couple of years. And I was like, and we were at the point, and she was really shy. So I was just kind of like trying to pull things out of her. And I said, and they didn't really we were working on their their PowerPoint deck specifically for an investor pitch. And there really wasn't great impressive numbers. But I said, can you tell me how many coffee bombs you've sold so far? And she goes, I'm not sure, but I can find it out. She had all the retail sales transactions. So she went back, and the next week she brought up, says, we've sold 1.5 million coffee bombs. And all of us advisors, and there's 7 of us advisors, there's 7 other founders in the room, we're all going, holy snikes, 1.5 million coffee bombs, just you and your partner? And she's like, yeah. And it was like, holy cow. And that, to me, I have this principle that I teach in storytelling called numeracy. You're trying to roll up information, find data points, things that are going to articulate in a very, very short period of time. And that's the beauty of numbers and data, to your point, Joe. You can take a number such as 1.5 million coffee bombs, and it speaks volume. Because right there, you just validated there's a market for this. You've proven that you can have the ability to sell millions of this product, even though the sales weren't great at this point, or they didn't have a lot of traction outside the Austin area. They're like, obviously, when someone tries this product, they love it. So that's what you want to think of as you, as a founder. What can you add information to, and then package it as simple as this? It doesn't have to be this crazy bar charts or graphics or anything. It just be a single number can make the difference. So for me, I always tell people, I've filmed 1,000 entrepreneurs, and I've produced 1,000 videos. So instantly, that gives me credibility as a producer. They said, well, this guy's not a beginner. And then I'll throw in some of the people that I filmed, so that elevates my performance level as a producer. And that's what you're looking for. You're trying to articulate to the audience that, number one, that your product is relevant, that you've got credibility, that your company's made progress. And you can do this in almost every facet of the business if you just start thinking about what can you quantify. That's what it comes down to when it comes to data storytelling.
Now, 2 questions. One, did you really use the word Snikes?
Yeah, I did.
Or did you,
I did.
that word? Okay.
I try not to cuss when I'm in those meetings. 101, I probably will cuss, but when I'm in those group sessions, I try to swap in some different names.
The other question, because you brought up something interesting about your conversation with her, do you find that you have to, in your conversations, when you're interviewing someone to pull out that story, do you find that you often dig up information that is awesome, but they never would have thought of to use, like in this situation?
All the time. I was filming yesterday, as a matter of fact. This is a second video I was doing for another graduate SKU program called Pickle Smash. And when I was doing my initial interview with him, Brian's a founder, and he's one of those guys, he's not quite sure what's interesting or not about his background or his experiences that are going to relate for a video. And he talked about when he was working for the previous company, he used to do IT installations for companies around the country. And that meant, obviously you'd have routers and Wi-Fi networks and cables, and a lot of times he's installing it. So wherever he would travel, he always tried to stay next to an Ace Hardware location. And I'm like, Okay, that's strange. Why would you do that? This just came randomly out of the conversation. He goes, well, when you go to Ace Hardware, they always have, not only do you have technology, but you've got hammers and saw and plaster and everything you need to do an installation in a small business. You just go to Ace Hardware and buy everything out. And they also have these quirky food snacks. And it was that experience. He was actually in an Ace Hardware and he was like buying hot sauces and pickled eggs and all these crazy products from the South, because every Ace Hardware has a different product.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the reason he came up with this product called Pickle Smash is because he decided to make pickle salsa one day. He wanted some relish for his hot dogs and his kid. He was barbecuing, and his wife had bought him a hot sauce, because all those trips to Ace Hardware, she's like, he must love hot sauce. So he bought him a hot sauce maker. And that was kind of the origin story of how he came up with this idea for Pickle Smash, because he was going to Ace Hardwares around the country, buying these products, crazy snack products. And that's what gave him the original idea. Like, well, I'll just make my own hot sauce, and then boom, Pickle Smash. And now, they're going to make 7 figures this year selling that product in 375 stores. So yes, you're absolutely right. And I would encourage you, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later. When you ask, as an interviewer, Joe, you know this, you start asking those questions, you go down those derivative rabbit holes, and ultimately you're going to find a gem. But you can do that yourself as a founder. You can think about, what are the things that happen to me? They're funny, they're sad, anything. I have this hat that I keep next to me. If you can see that, bad decisions make good stories. That's his hat. I bought this in an Ace Hardware store when I'm visiting my mom a month ago. And the reason I keep this is that every experience you have is a potential story or nugget for story that you can eventually use as part of your pitch, as part of your presentation, as part of your one-on-one meeting, that's going to make your story more compelling, more interesting, and ultimately figure out a way to make a connection with your audience.
Excellent. And like you said, for the audience, one of the things we're going to get into in a little bit is showing you how to pull this information out of yourself to make your stories. So just a quick reminder for everybody, feel free to drop some questions in the chat that we'll hit once we're done with the presentation. So what are some of the different types of founder stories?
If you can pull up slide number 4, Joe.
Number 4?
There were two, the audience, as you can tell, Joe and I had a little pre-discussion here, so I got some of these questions ahead of time. But there are 2 story types, I like to call them. One is the origin story, and the second is going to be the aha moment. So slide number 4, which is Drew Houston, if you see that one. So this is a classic origin story that I like to share. Drew Houston is Drew Houston, actually. He's the founder of DROPBOX. So his origin story, he was working up in Massachusetts, and he just finished school at MIT, and he's working on this graduate school testing software. And he's sitting there coding along and just kind of hanging out, making progress along this. And his parents said, hey, we want you to come down for this reunion we're having in New York. And he's like, I don't want to go there. It's just like, I got to work on this program, typical hard programming software. So he said, well, you know what? It's a 4-hour bus ride. I can work on the computer and I can code some issues while I'm there. So he leaves, he jumps in a taxi, goes from his dorm room to the bus station and gets on the bus station, pulls out his laptop, and he decides to start working on his computer. And this is before Wi-Fi was ubiquitous and everything else. And he realized that he left his flash drive back on his desk at his dorm room. And he's like, crap. And he was cussing. Larry talks about it. He was so upset because now he's stuck for 4 hours. All that base code was back at his program. And he's going, this is ridiculous. How can me as a programmer not be able to work on my code when I'm in? I should be able to access Wi-Fi, because at MIT, no matter where you were, you had the ability to access your files anywhere. So he was very upset. So once 15 minutes, he blew off steam. He decided to write a code that would allow you to access your files from anywhere that you're at. And that became the genesis for what we now know as DROPBOX, which has 550 million users, 180 countries, and essentially they're doing $1 billion, whatever. And they are one of the first products that were super simple to use, so that any consumer or half geek like you and me, Joe, can just load up our files, whether they're photos and images or videos or documents, So Google Drive is the one we all use now. This is
Mhm.
pre-Google Drive. This is
Well,
before
yeah,
any of
I
this
don't
was
even
out.
know the last time I used a thumb drive, in the past couple of years. I mean, it's so ubiquitous, like you said, whatever platform, whether it's Dropbox or Box or Google Drive or on Microsoft OneDrive, or that's all you use now.
And so that's an example of an origin story, because we can relate to that. Back in the
Mhm.
day, especially then, when you had to have a flash drive, I always carried a flash drive on a shoelace tied around my neck when I'm as a producer, because I had files there. I didn't want to lose them. If you cruise to the next slide there, this is the one's on Jen Groover. This is another popular story type called the aha moment. So Jen Groover was a mother of 2 twins, and she used to travel with these 2 babies when they were very, very small, all around the place, doing errands. And she would be at the grocery store or some type of shopping place, and she had everything in her purse, as women do. I have 4 sisters. I know exactly what this is like. So basically, she's checking out at the grocery store, and she can't find her credit card. So she literally, because she's got 2 kids, one screaming, the other one's crawling all over the place, she grabs a purse and dumps it on the conveyor belt so that she can find her credit card. And when she leaves there, she's embarrassed, she's frustrated, she goes home, there's gotta be a better way. So she started thinking about this. What can I do? What can I make it so it's easy to find my keys or my credit card or whatever inside my purse? So one night, she's emptying the dishwasher and she sees the utensil bin, the little basket that's in the
Mhm.
dishwasher. And she goes, oh my God. She grabs that utensil bin, empties all the forks and silverware out of it, grabs a purse, empties the purse. She sticks that utensil bin inside the purse. And boom, what we now call as the butler bag. If you go to the next slide, Joe, you can see what it looks like. But in that moment, for her, it was a real aha moment.
Huh.
She recognized that utensil bin could be a way to organize her purse so that you could quickly open the purse and reach into the key department, your credit cards, your lipstick, or whatever it is that you need quick access to. Most women are going to know exactly what I'm talking about here if you've ever had a purse that had a lot of stuff or too much stuff in it. And that's a great example of just, you have this aha moment. It's like, oh my God, how simple is that? But some of the best ideas, like that pickle smash one I told you
Mhm.
about, just putting pickles and salsa together, or in this case, putting utensil bin inside a purse as a way to organize it. That's a great example of an aha moment. Both of these relate to people when you're thinking about how to structure your store, because aha moments make you think, damn, I wish I'd have thought about that.
Yep.
Aha's like, oh man, that should have been my idea. Origin stories, they don't have to be these beautiful, crazy, kick myself in the head for not thinking about it. They're just like, this is how it happened. And you find ways to make that experience interesting. And with Drew Houston from DROPBOX, he talked about how he was stuck on the bus for 4 hours. Another example of numbers, Joe. Thinking about, because it makes it real.
Yeah. Yep.
Everybody knows what it's like to be stuck on a long travel excursion, buses or planes or automobiles, it doesn't matter. And he's stuck there, he can't access his work. And that's what you're looking for. So those are 2 examples, the origin story and the aha type story.
Awesome. And it's funny. Somebody commented after you showed your hat. He said that means I have thousands of stories.
All right, excellent.
From
That's what it's for. This is how you build that inventory there, participants. We love that. Love it.
So now we'll get into some tactics. So what are some key tactics to making a powerful story that's also memorable in the way that you talked about earlier?
You bet. If you could pull up slide number 7. And really what we're trying to do is figure out ways to connect with the audience in an emotional manner. And there are 3 ways that I like to share with entrepreneurs to do this. So you have that emotional bridge. Think about it as you're making this bridge to the audience so they can feel what you feel, or at least understand what you're feeling about. So the first one is called Make It Personal. And this goes back to, if you kicked into slide number 8, which is Jen Groover again, Make It Personal. When she talks about that experience, being in that grocery store with 2 kids in tow and her purse, and she empties her purse onto the conveyor belt. If you're a woman with children, you know what that's like. She talks about how embarrassing it was, how that it felt, and she was so frustrated about it. And how for the next 6 months, every single day, she goes, there's got to be a way I can do this. There's got to be a way I think about it. And then she talks about the revelation of, she's literally in her dishwasher. We've all done that. We've emptied that dishwasher. Yeah. We pulled these things out. And who would have thought that utensil bin would have been so valuable? because she told me, I said, Jen, how many times have you told that story in that way? She goes, thousands. And the reason being that, you know, first year she did 1 million, the next year 10 million. And then she got in QVC in that second year. And every time she was on QVC, they asked her to relate that personal story. It was embarrassing. She was frustrating. It was just this long process. So you want to think about ways to make it personal. Now, this is different from a lot of people in my space that teach entrepreneurial storytelling. A lot of them said, don't make it personal. This is business. I call 100% BS on that, Joe. And the reason is, if you're a business owner, it is personal. You've invested your time, your savings, all your energy, all your free time, your friends, your family. You made a lot of sacrifices. It's personal. You want people to know why you're doing this and what's driving you and why nothing is going to get in your way. So figure out ways to make it personal.
Yeah, I agree. And then showing that vulnerability too. I mean, we're all people. You're doing business with people. Here, our business is about bringing buyers and sellers together, right? They're interacting. It's person to person. So I'm there with you 100%. I think it's really important to make it personal.
Yeah, click on the next slide, Joe. We're going to talk about someone near and dear to my heart because she's based in Austin, Texas. Now, KENDRA Scott, when she first started the company, she had kind of a similar story. She was pregnant with her first child, and she ended up becoming bedridden at the time. So she's stuck in bed, couldn't go anywhere, and she was learning about how to make jewelry. So while she's there, she spent the next 6 months from being in bed. And then when she had her baby, she started going store to store selling these different jewelry pieces that she was making. And she'd have a baby in tow and then her jewelry bag in another, and going from all these retail stores. And what was interesting is that she shared with them is that she hated this jewelry that you would buy in the mall at Claire's or something that was $5, $10, $20 pieces, and they'd fall apart after 2 or 3 wears. And at the other end of the spectrum, there were beautiful, gorgeous pieces of jewelry that you would buy at these jewelry stores, but they were $1,000. They're like a car payment. And she goes, I don't want to buy the cheap stuff, but I want something that looks nice and pretty. So she went telling all these retail store owners, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is the place that I'm thinking of. And, the company's valued at over $1 billion. Just an amazing success story, 90 stores. If you go to the next slide, Joe, you can get a picture of that first jewelry item that she shared. Now, what was really important about this particular story as it pertains to how do you make that connection and make it memorable, she talks about the white space. And the white space, as pertains to storytelling, is you're talking about an area in the market that these people are ignoring or they're not seeing. And in her case, you had the $20, $25 jewelry, and then you had the $500 or $1,000 jewelry. No one was focusing on that $100 to $250 pieces of jewelry that looked beautiful, such as these, but yet, and they were quality, but didn't cost you, a house payment for them. So what you're looking for as a way to articulate what's unique and different about not only your product, but the market opportunity that you've identified. No one is focusing on that space. Like another person I talk about a lot is John Paul DeJoya, the founder of Patron Tequila. When he came up with that product, the only thing people knew about at that time was that tequila story we all had in college where you vomited for whatever reason because you drank too much. When he talked about Patron Tequila, he had recently been introduced what they call sipping tequila. This is, we're talking 25, 30 years ago, so you really didn't have much out there except Jose Cuervo and some other really crappy tequilas. But he actually positioned this white space for where Patron was going to position itself in a super premium category that was a sipping. And the way he did it, not only did he talk about that, these were in handcrafted bottles. He put a little ribbon on it, this beautiful cork on top of it, and this glossy gold or green or purple box with gold lace on the end of it. So it was all this presentation that he wrapped that positioning of not only the white space and from a price point, but also packaging from that standpoint. The name, Patron, as the El Jefe of an organization. So things like that is another way. Is finding that white space and putting your product and positioning there so it's memorable along those lines. So the third way, Joe, if you go to the next slide, which is slide about Scott Harrison. This goes back to your perspective on vulnerability. Scott Harrison is probably one of the best nonprofit storytellers I've ever been around, an amazing storyteller. So Scott Harrison was a promoter in New York City, and this guy was living the life that every college guy wants to. He was promoting all kinds of brand new liquors and beers. People would pay him money to show up at a party holding a particular beverage because he was really known as this partier in New York City. So all the hot bars hosted him, not hot restaurants. They'd pay him to throw a party for their opening, whatever it be once. You know, eventually though, it became kind of this soulless life for him because he was doing a lot of drugs. He was get drunk all the time, hungover, not feeling great, just sleeping around. It wasn't a great life when you think about things. So he had kind of a come to Jesus moment on a trip when he was in South America. And he goes, I want to change my life. So he fast forward, he went on this thing called the Mercy ships, which is a ship that goes around the coast of Africa and visits villages that don't have access to proper medical services or people or equipment. And while he's there, he learned, because he was a photographer, he was taking pictures of everything for all the doctors on this Mercy ship. He learned that the #1 cause for most of the illnesses that these people were experiencing was due to lack of drinking water, lack of clean drinking water. So he decided to go back to New York, came up with this concept. I can use my promoter skills and everything I'm really good about, getting people hyped up about, and I'm going to ask people, instead of like donating money for a party, why don't you donate money to help drill a well somewhere in Africa to a village that doesn't have any? And he would show, and if you want to click to the next slide, so you can see some of the photos that he'd captured. He'd go around to all these villages, and the before photos were more about the cleft lips or different pieces of their face that had been attacked by viruses or bacteria. And then he would show through video and also through photography and these stories he would tell on stage about how the donations that you were making, $10, $20, $100, were helping drill these wells in Africa. Now today, he's raised over $500 million and drilled over 30,000 wells around the world. And what's important about this, Joe, as you referenced earlier, is that he is not afraid to get vulnerable. Not only showing, obviously he was talking about how he partied, he was living this great life, but he talks about, how he reached a soulless moment where, what am I doing with my life? Why am I, I'm getting drunk, I'm doing drugs. He was just really vulnerable. And you see him on stage, you know that Scott's mission is to bring clean drinking water to every corner of the earth, because he's not afraid to go there, because he knows the most powerful way, the most expeditious way to make an emotional connection with someone is to share something vulnerable. Brene Brown's one of the master at this. She teaches this all the time. If you share something that's a little bit scary to share, you're on the right track. Now, you're not trying to scare people, you're not trying to make them feel sorry for you. What you're trying to do is get them to feel what you feel and understand how that relates to your business. That's what's a change for him. So getting vulnerable is super important when it comes to storytelling.
Excellent. Well, this is important too, because I know a lot of our brands that we work with are involved in different charitable or sustainability, and so there's a lot of stories to tell there. So now we have 22 minutes left, so I'm going to skip over a couple of parts because I want to get the nuts and bolts of crafting the story in. I really want to make sure that everybody gets that, and then if I can work some of the other things, topics into that, we can go back. But in your book, you mentioned the steps, right, of building the inventory of assets, organizing these assets, and then creating the storage shed, right? So for everybody who's watching, who's thinking, what, how do I actually put this thing together? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, let's do, I was going to have you let's go to slide number 16, Joe. That's the
16, okay.
Yep, the framework there. So that people
can
get an
SOFE framework.
Idea. Yep, SOFE framework, stands for Storytelling for Entrepreneurs framework. And what I've done, I looked at a lot of different diagrams and structures and frameworks in my 10 years of working on the book, and then since then, and they were all very complicated. And what I realized is that I didn't need to look at Plato or Joseph Campbell's or any of these people that had these complex, or Robert McKee, who have great storytelling structures, don't get me wrong, but they're made for Hollywood. They're meant for long format storytelling. And as an entrepreneur, you rarely have a chance to give a long format story. What you need to remember is that a story basically has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's where you want to think about your story. You want to be something right at the beginning to grab their attention. It's something that happened to you much in the case of we were talking about with Drew Houston from DROPBOX. He was working on his software for the testing things, and he said, got to go to New York. And then he gets on the bus, and then something happened. That's what we call the incident. So he like gets on the bus, and he's like, crap, I forgot my flash drive. What am I going to do? And he's kind of upset. And he's sitting there, and we can get more into the middle. We don't have a lot of time to go over the middle. But essentially, he talked about the challenges that he faced. You know, what was challenging about trying to access his files. What at MIT he worked with in terms of being able to access files anywhere. And eventually he talks about the outcome. When he was done, by the time he got back to MIT, he had already coded the core base, the kernel that became the basis for what we now know as DROPBOX. And that was kind of the outcome. So what you're looking to do is take this information that you have and structure it into a beginning, a middle, and an end. And something you've got a setup, such as in the case of Jen Groover, when she's like got 2 children, she does shopping a long time, she goes to the store, that's kind of set up. And then the incident in which she drops this information, all of her stuff that was in her purse on the conveyor belt, and how frustrated she was. And then she spent the next 6 months. So this particular framework, just the beginning, middle, and end, using the setup, the incident, the challenges to change the outcome. That's something that's in my book. You can kind of dive in that. But if you want to share that link with them, Joe, that's the slide before this. You can download a free copy of what I call the Chrono History. And essentially, the Chrono History document is a way to reach back in your own life and figure out the things that have happened as they relate to you and your business, so that you can eventually parlay that into that beginning, middle, and end segments. And it's broken down in those same exact 5 categories: the setup, the incident, the challenges, the change, and the outcome. It's structured in that way so that you can use that to help you do your own personal inventory of the things that have happened to you that relate to your business. The definition of story. Now, there's a lot of them that are out there, but for me, it goes back to one simple thing. You had an experience in your life that has a powerful relationship, a meaning to your business. It is as simple as that. That experience has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you want to use that starting point, that experience that happened to you, that triggered you, that put you on this path, that opened your eye, that aha moment, whatever that is. And you want to kind of put that in the middle of this chrono history process. And then you can start understanding, well, what's the beginning? You know, what happened? What's that setup? And then what's that incident that kind of got me down this path? What are the challenges that I faced? The bigger the challenges, the more awkward. You go back to bad decisions make great stories. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for the things that are going to help those things. And I'll give you a working example of something I did. Now, as you referenced, I'm now a partner in this company called Share. Best trail mix you've ever had in your life. Wasn't my company, but I met the founder at a conference, and we got to talk. He shared his share with me. I shared my book with him, and then now we're partners in the business. So when I kind of went over this structure with him, we spent a lot of time on his background because he's got a rich background. You know, he's had 37 years in the outdoor industry. So he meets with buyers a lot of time for what he's doing. And I was asking him, so what stories are you sharing with him? And he started going off all these different stories every time. Okay, hold on there, cowboy. Let's go back. Let's figure it out. So in that process of doing the chrono history with him, the process I would do with him, he wasn't a good writer, but he loves to talk. And I'm like, well, I can't sit there and talk. I would have him record on voice memos questions that I would ask him. And I discovered that there are 9 siblings. In his product, you can see it in this clear jar I have, there are 9 ingredients. Like, oh, that's interesting. 9 siblings, 9 ingredients. Like this. 37 years in the outdoor industry. This product is meant for the outdoor industry. It's at REI, it's at Whole Foods, it's at Erewhon, different things. So I started going back with him, using the chrono history process to pull those nuggets, those pieces of information that I found were really interesting. And that's how we started crafting the story. And ultimately, one of the things we had talked about earlier, Joe, is, you know, how long should your story be? And that's kind of like, well, how long is a string? You need to have ultimately a lot of different versions of your story. You need to have a 30-second story, a 60-second story, a 90-second, a 2-minute, a 3-minute, and a 5-minute. And then if you give them a chance to make a keynote, 10 minutes, 20 minutes along those lines. But you want to use that process that I was just going through, find all those nuggets of information, put this in this beginning, middle, end format, and then if you need to tighten it up, then you can do that over time, whenever you got that time.
So in the beginning, when you're building the asset inventory, you get as much as you can. Just fill it and fill it and fill it, and then you organize it according to these parts. And then depending on how you're going to deploy that story, that's when you make your 30-second, your minute, your so on and so forth. So for example, if suppliers, at our programs, they have 5-minute meetings, they have 10-minute meetings, they have 20-minute meetings. So for each one, maybe they'll have a different length story. The story component will be a little bit different length. And then obviously, if someone writes a book, that's the really, really long version.
Exactly. So one thing, for instance, when we teach the SKU participants in that accelerator I was referencing you, that's a 5-minute pitch that we're working them towards.
Mm-hmm.
It averages the story is about 30 seconds of that 5 minutes. So if you've got a 5-minute meeting, 10-minute meeting, you want to correlate. You don't want to take the 5 minutes just telling a story. You want to get a story, start with story, hence, that's the name of my book back there. That's what you should start with, hopefully. And then you use that for the period of time, and then you get back to the other elements that they're going to want to talk about. And if you've done it right, the narrative thread from your story is going to be woven in everything that you talk about. So in the case of Share, I talk about Peter Rushford, who was the founder of Share.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about his 37 years experience in the outdoor industry. So he talks about his story, how he founded the trail mix and everything else that came along. And then later on, we mentioned that he's worked with Keen, that he worked with UGG, that he worked with Varney. So we're all those outdoor brands that we didn't mention in that 30-second story, but as he's talking about his experience, his credibility about why he's the person to do this, or why this product is a perfect fit for a particular retail store in the mountains, it's because I used to work in the mountains. I used to deliver and work on these things. So in your buyer meetings or wherever these meetings that you're going to have with investors or consumers, you're trying to take that 30-second story and pull elements out that you can talk about in whatever the messaging or business points that you want to reference along those lines. So that's what it means about a story and then having a narrative thread throughout everything else along those lines.
So, and you'll have different types of stories. So let's say a story you may share with an investor might have a different flavor than one you would share with a buyer or with another business partner, a different type of business partner.
Yeah, what I recommend from that standpoint, especially when you're first starting out, don't worry about having a lot of different versions of your story, a lot of different stories. Focus on getting one solid, good story that you've got micro, short, medium, long, and extra long versions of it. Just nail that story really well. Just feel great about it. Then, second step is then think about the most frequent audiences you're going to face: a buyer, an investor, a consumer, someone in the press. As a CPG company, those are a lot of times who you're going to face the most frequently. What's important to a buyer? They want to know what's the turns going to be, what's the margin going to be, how can you relate pieces of information that are going to resonate with that buyer. With an investor, they want to know why you. They're investing on you, the horse. So you got to give them credibility perspective. So you want to know what like that. If it's a consumer, like, how are you going to solve my problem? This is the best tasting trail mix I've ever had in my life. Well, okay, you've got my interest. Your taste buds are watering. You want to think about things like that. Whoever your audience is, you're going to tweak your core story with pieces of information that are going to resonate with that target audience. That's what it comes down to, as opposed to making a lot of different stories. It's one core story that's tweaked to every audience.
Gotcha. And this tweaking, would you also tweak it differently depending on the platforms on which you're going to share it? So if you're going to deliver it as a blog on your website or social media, or maybe a video on social media, an image on social media, you could take these just different tidbits and repurpose them different ways?
Absolutely. You definitely want to think about the medium. Now, one thing I recommend, if you're an author, you carry your book with you. If you're a CPG company, you carry your product with you. You're always trying to stimulate multiple senses: visual, audio, kinesthetic. Think of whatever the channel that you're using. How can you stimulate the audience in multiple ways? Because everybody has a different learning style. So you're trying to reach them whatever learning style resonates with them. And the more you hit them with visual, audio, and maybe even kinesthetic, talking about things they feel like, the higher probability you're going to connect with them and get them to resonate with whatever you're talking about.
Now, how do you overcome the so what factor, right? You're putting everything together, and people are always, maybe it's a little bit of imposter syndrome. You're worried that they're going to say, well, okay, so what? Who cares?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple ways to do this. And if you want to pull up that one slide, I think this is a great Tony Horton. Let's just go straight to slide 14, Joe. And a powerful way to overcome the so what factor is show them a before photo and an after photo. Not many people know Tony Horton is the founder of the P90X, one of the most successful workout regimes ever in history. I mean, infomercials, products, he really nailed it with this particular product. Not many people know that he had a stutter and he wasn't in very good shape and was a skinny kid in college. And the reason he decided to get in shape is he wanted to go to Hollywood and wanted to act in movies. It wasn't to get in shape. He's like, I want to be on camera. And his football coach says, you'll never make it. You're too skinny. But he met someone who taught athletics, or he taught weightlifting, how he could better improve his body. So a quick way to really address the so what factor you just talked about is show them this before and after photos. Joe, I saw on your LinkedIn feed, you talked about how you got into intermittent fasting and eating healthy and things like that one. And what did you do? You showed a before and an after photo.
Yeah.
And it's because we all know what that like. If you've ever watched any infomercial on the weekend, or you've anything, any of your social media feeds, you're seeing them. And that's because they work. You're showing that here you are. I have a product that's going to solve your problem, and it's going to put you here. Because ultimately, people buy products because they want to go from here to there. And that could be solving a problem, getting rid of a pain, making them feel better, or making someone else feel better by giving them a gift. So a before and after photo is a great expeditious way to quickly get over that so what factor along those lines.
That is a really big contrast with that sports jacket too.
No doubt, no doubt. That is a classic jacket, right? I want to bring that one back.
Yeah, and I touched on imposter syndrome before, and this is something that comes up a lot, not just in entrepreneurial stories, but just people and content in general. They're afraid to put something out there because they feel it's not good enough. People aren't going to like it, so they keep it. For example, one time we were at a session, and one of our teammates filmed a video interview with somebody. But because there was, when we would do our programs in person, there would be a 2-minute warning. They'd make an announcement over the loudspeaker. So because right in the middle of the video, you heard the 2-minute, 2 minutes, everybody, she didn't put it up, didn't post it. But when I saw the video, I was like, wait a minute. The content in that video was awesome. Everybody knows this is a live thing. That stuff happens when you're at live things. Let's put it up anyway, because it was just so good. But people might hesitate to put stuff out there. What is your recommendation for kind of overcoming that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I noticed in the chat room, Chief Josie from Greystone Tea. Hope you got your name right, Chief. He talked about how showing founder and family vulnerability were some of the most engaging social media reactions that they got. And the core reason to that is when you're vulnerable, you're crossing this kind of impassable barrier. And to give an example, if I say, hey, Joe, I want you to buy this pen. This pen is like amazing. You're going to love this pen. So that's kind of the sales pitch. If you talk about, this was the pen I used to sign when I had to put my dog to sleep. And I had to make a choice, and I saved this pen because it's very important to me. That was a really hard choice for me. So a lot of people talk about they don't want to share those kind of emotional moments because they feel like, oh, I want to be perfect. I don't want to show that side of me. But at the end of the day, we're humans. We can relate to that. If you've ever owned a dog, you know what that's like to put a dog to sleep. It is not an easy situation. And this pen, and I also keep something by my desk. This is his paw print. Right? And maybe that's not the same as showing a big mistake that you made, but the principle's the same. Is normally does that make me feel less of a man like this? Am I emasculated because I have my dog's properly? No, this is important to me. I care about this. And whenever I see someone talk about a dog product or someone that cares about someone they love, I'm like, hey, I get that right away. So what you're looking for, if you go back to the reason we share stories is to make an emotional connection with the audience. If you want to just inform them, you share facts and figures. But if you want to make that emotional connection because you want to influence them to make a decision in your favor. If I can reach you, Joe, if I know any day we can talk about fasting, I got instant connection with you.
Yep.
If I want to talk about the mistakes, how I fell off the wagon, and then one weekend I couldn't do it. I ate from 8 in the morning until 12 at night. You're going to relate because you've been there. You know, we've all fallen off the wagon. We've all made the mistake. Going back to your point, where the person didn't want to share that because that 2 minutes. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm like, that makes it real. I mean, people want real. They want authenticity because people are always trying to sell them pens. And instead of sharing with them the reason why this pen is important to me, and maybe you'll buy a pen like it because you care like I do.
Yeah, I think you hit on it perfectly. Authenticity. I used to be really self-conscious when I started putting myself on video because one, I have a very, very strong New York City, blue-collar New York accent. I slur certain words. There are certain words I will just avoid if they have too many syllables. But then after a while, I realized, you know what? There's not that many people in my industry that are from my area of New York. It stands out a little bit. People remember it because, so I just embrace it. And I don't have the most perfect diction. I don't have good diction at all sometimes. But you know what? That's me. So then when somebody meets me in person, they're like, oh, you're the same dude that I just saw the video of. And it's just, it's made me feel a lot more comfortable just being myself. And I think that's a big hurdle for some people, especially in the beginning when they're new to posting or creating content.
Absolutely. And there's probably one of the masters at this, also a speaker at your event, is Gary Vaynerchuk. If there's anybody that has no filters whatsoever, he's just going to share it. He cusses all the time. He shares his most embarrassing moments. He shares his biggest dream. He doesn't care because he knows that there's an audience that cares about what he cares about. And that he's going to reach those people. When he started doing his Wine Library TV, it was in the basement of the liquor store that his dad owned. And he had this small little one of those old video cameras, and he had a tin bucket spittoon. He'd taste wine, and he had Cheetos and different bags and everything else. And he'd kind of pair these crazy wines with these weird foods. And he'd spit the spittoon, and this terribly lit, and he just cussed all the time. Yeah. Because it was this aura of authenticity that had never been seen in the wine industry before. Because it was always really high-end type stuff. And
he said he looked like a hostage. He'd be the first one to say he looked like he was a hostage. So, all right. So we have 2 minutes left, and I'm sorry we won't be able to get to questions, but we're going to send a follow-up email to everybody. And if you're more than welcome to reach out to Lyn or myself, and then we'll get any questions answered that you might have. So Lyn, we got a minute and a half left before it shuts off on us. Final takeaway for everybody who's watching, who's doing meetings tomorrow, something quick that they could do to put together a quick story.
Let me tell you something. This goes back to what you asked about earlier. What's a way to kind of get over that imposter syndrome and not quite sure that confidence? You are the only person in the entire world that has the knowledge that you do, the experiences that you have, and the network that you have. So what that enables you to do is, you've heard this phrase that no one is you and that is your power. No one has your story, and that is your power as a founder, I've always found. And it's because no one could write this book that I did, because no one took the particular journey that I had to get me there, or even where you're talking about, Joe, my friend from Share Snacks. It's like he's the only person in the entire world that could have spent 3 years working on a recipe for trail mix that was unique and different than anybody else out there. So your friends, your people watching this, it's the same thing. I encourage you to think about what makes you special, because no one has your experience. No one has been through those experiences, the knowledge you've gained, the network you have to make your story unique, different, and unlike anybody else on the entire planet. Remember that, and you'll go a long ways in all these meetings.
Awesome. Perfect timing. So thank you, Lyn. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, we'll make his information available in case you want to reach out. Take care.